Nebraska Territory, 1859, where being born different could mean being sold like cattle. When 17-year-old Luna Ashford's own mother trades her to a traveling show for $30 silver, it seems her pale skin and pink eyes have finally sealed her fate as nothing more than a curiosity to be displayed. But what happens when a mysterious rancher intervenes, seeing something in her that even she doesn't know exists? The scream that shattered the Nebraska morning wasn't human, it was the sound of dreams dying. Luna Ashford pressed her face against the cracked window of their sod house, watching her mother chase their last chicken around the dusty yard, while cursing words that would make a preacher faint. "Get back here, you feathered devil!" Margaret Ashford shouted, her worn dress flapping like broken wings as she lunged for the bird. The chicken squawked and darted between her legs, sending her tumbling face first into the dirt. Luna bit her lip to keep from laughing. Her mother's temper had grown shorter each day since the bankman's last visit. The stack of overdue notices on their kitchen table told the whole story. They owed money they didn't have for land that barely grew weeds. "Luna, stop gawking and help me," her mother called, but Luna couldn't move. Not because she was lazy, but because Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring farm was walking up their path. And Luna knew what that meant. Visitors meant stares. Stares meant whispers. Whispers meant her mother would spend the rest of the day explaining why her daughter looked like winter itself had claimed her. Luna's reflection in the glass showed the truth that haunted every day of her 17 years. Hair so white it seemed to glow, skin pale as fresh milk, and eyes the color of sunrise, pink and strange and wrong. The other children in town called her Ghost Girl when they thought she couldn't hear. The adults were worse. They crossed themselves and muttered about bad omens. "Morning, Margaret," Mrs. Henderson called, stepping carefully around the escaped chicken. Her eyes found Luna through the window, and that familiar look crossed her face, part fear, part pity, part disgust. "How are you folks managing?" Luna's mother straightened her dress and forced a smile that fooled nobody. "Just fine, thank you. Luna's been such a help with the books. Smart as a whip, that girl." "I'm sure she is, Mrs. Bright," Henderson replied, but her tone said otherwise. "Actually, I came to warn you. There's a stranger in town asking questions about unusual folks, offering money." The words hit Luna like ice water. She'd heard stories about men who collected people like her, people born different. They traveled from town to town, gathering human curiosities for shows in the big cities. She'd always thought they were just scary tales to make children behave. "What kind of questions?" her mother asked, and Luna heard something new in her voice. Not fear, hope. "Mrs. Henderson glanced toward the window where Luna still stood frozen. "About your daughter specifically." Seems words spread about her condition. Luna's heart began to race. She watched her mother's face change, saw the way her eyes lit up with possibilities that made Luna's stomach turn cold. Margaret Ashford was a woman drowning in debt, and suddenly someone was throwing her a rope. I see," her mother said slowly. "Did this stranger say where he was staying?" "The hotel in town. Goes by the name Holloway." "Margaret, you're not seriously thinking about what's best for my family." Margaret cut her off. "Luna's different, yes, but that doesn't mean she can't have a future. Maybe even a better one than she'd find here." Luna stumbled backward from the window, her chest tight with panic. She knew that tone. It was the same voice her mother had used when she sold their last cow, their good plow, her father's gold pocket watch. It was the voice of someone who had found something valuable to trade. The wooden cross around Luna's neck, the only thing left of her father, felt suddenly heavy. He died of lung sickness when she was 12, but before the fever took him, he'd pressed the small carved cross into her palm. "You're precious, little star," he'd whispered with his last clear words. "Don't ever let anyone tell you different." But fathers were buried deep, and mothers had bills to pay. Luna ran to her room, which was really just a corner of the main space, blocked off by hanging blankets. Her few belongings fit in a grain sack: 2 dresses, her father's Bible, a rag doll with button eyes, and the small mirror she rarely looked in anymore. Through the thin walls, she could hear her mother and Mrs. Henderson talking in hushed voices. Words floated through like poison: burden, opportunity, no other choice, for the best. Luna sank onto her narrow bed and stared at her hands. They were good hands, strong from farm work, gentle with animals, quick with numbers, but they were also pale as bone, marked with the same strangeness that colored every part of her life. She thought about running. The prairie stretched for miles in every direction, offering plenty of places to hide. But where would she go? What would she eat? How long could a ghost girl survive in a world that already wished she didn't exist? A knock at the door made her jump. Heavy boots crossed the floor, followed by a voice she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Ashford? I'm told you have a daughter who might be exactly what I'm looking for." Luna's blood turned to ice. Through a gap in the blankets, she could see a tall man in a black coat standing in their doorway. His smile was wide and white, but his eyes were small and calculating, like a hawk studying a mouse. "She's a good girl," her mother was saying, wringing her hands on her apron. "Works hard, reads well, never causes trouble." "I'm sure she's wonderful," the man replied. His voice was smooth as oil. "My name is Holloway, and I run a traveling exhibition. Educational entertainment, you might say. People pay good money to see the wonders of creation, and your daughter would be quite the wonder indeed." Luna pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. This couldn't be happening. Her own mother wouldn't actually sell her like livestock, would she? But as she listened to them discuss terms and conditions, as she heard the word $30 spoken like a prayer, Luna realized that maternal love had its limits, and they'd just reached theirs. The cross around her neck seemed to burn against her skin, reminding her of promises made by dead fathers to daughters who were running out of people to trust. Outside her window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and Luna wondered if the sky was weeping for what was about to be lost. The stranger's money clinked like church bells in her mother's desperate hands. Luna watched from behind her blanket wall as 30 silver coins disappeared into the old coffee tin, where they kept their emergency funds coins that would buy them another month before the bank took everything. "She'll be ready within the hour," Margaret promised, not looking toward Luna's corner. "She doesn't have much to pack." Holloway adjusted his black hat and smiled that oil-slick smile. "Excellent. The wagon's outside when she's prepared." "Oh, and Mrs. Ashford?" He paused at the door. "You've made the right choice. The girl will see more of the world than she ever would stuck out here." Luna's hands shook as she folded her extra dress. The world he spoke of wasn't one she wanted to see. It was one that would stare at her, point at her, pay money to gawk at the freak show that was her life. "Luna." Her mother's voice came through the blanket, soft and broken. "Come out, child. We need to talk." Luna pushed through the hanging fabric, her grain sack clutched against her chest like armor. Her mother sat at their worn kitchen table, staring at the coins as if they might disappear if she looked away. "You don't understand how hard this is," Margaret began, still not meeting her daughter's eyes. "The bank wants their money. Mrs. Patterson won't extend our credit at the store. We're 3 weeks from losing everything your father worked to build." "So you're selling me instead," Luna said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when everything inside her was screaming. "I'm giving you a chance." Margaret's head snapped up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What future do you have here? What man will marry you? What children will accept you? At least this way, you'll have food and shelter and purpose." Purpose. The word tasted bitter as medicine. Luna's purpose, according to her mother, was to be strange enough to entertain strangers who paid to laugh at God's mistakes. "Did you ever love me?" Luna whispered. "Or was I always just something you were waiting to trade?" The slap came fast and hard, snapping Luna's head to the side. Her mother's hand trembled as she lowered it, horror replacing anger in her expression. "Don't you ever say that again," Margaret breathed. "Everything I've done for you. To keep you safe, to keep you fed, to give you a life worth living. This house, this land, it's all for you. And if selling myself would pay the debts, I'd do it in a heartbeat. But nobody wants a used-up farm woman. They want you." Luna touched her stinging cheek, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip. Outside, she could hear Holloway talking to his horses, getting ready for a journey that would take her further from home than she'd ever been. "I could work harder," she offered desperately. "Take in laundry, help with other folks' books." Mrs. Henderson says a lot of things," Margaret cut her off. "But she doesn't say them when money's due. She doesn't say them when winter comes, and we've got no coal for the stove. She doesn't say them when you're hungry, and I've got nothing to feed you but promises." Luna looked around the little sod house that had been her whole world. The walls were cracked and stained, the furniture was old and broken, the roof leaked when it rained. But it was home. It was the place where her father had told her stories, where she'd learned to read by lamplight, where she'd dreamed of a future that didn't involve being stared at by strangers. "What if I run?" she asked quietly. Her mother's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Where? The nearest town is 40 miles through prairie grass and wolf country. You think your pale skin won't stand out like a beacon? You think folks out there will be kinder than the ones here?" Luna knew her mother was right. She'd heard the stories of what happened to young women alone on the frontier. The dangers that waited in empty spaces were worse than the cruelty she'd face in Holloway's traveling show. "Time to go, Miss Ashford," Holloway called from outside. Luna picked up her grain sack and walked toward the door, each step feeling like a small death. At the threshold, she turned back to look at her mother one last time. Margaret sat hunched over the table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The silver coins scattered before her looked like fallen stars, beautiful and cold, and impossibly distant. "I forgive you, Mama," Luna said, though forgiveness felt like swallowing stones. "But I'll never forget that when I needed you most, you chose money over me." She didn't wait for a response. Outside, Holloway's wagon waited like a black hearse in the morning sun. The horses stamped impatiently, sensing the storm clouds that continued to build on the horizon. "Climb up, my dear," Holloway said, patting the wooden seat beside him. "We've got a long journey ahead, and weather's coming." Luna pulled herself up onto the hard bench, her bag clutched in her lap. As they rolled away from the only home she'd ever known, she didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see her mother watching them go, counting silver coins while her daughter disappeared into a future that promised everything except love. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, brown grass waving like the surface of a vast, empty sea. Somewhere out there was the life her mother had sold her into, a life of being pointed at, whispered about, treated like a thing instead of a person. But as the wagon wheels turned and the miles passed beneath them, Luna made herself a promise. She would survive whatever came next. She would find a way to prove that her worth couldn't be measured in silver coins or admission tickets. She would show the world that being different didn't mean being less. The storm clouds followed them east, and Luna wondered if they were chasing her toward her destiny or trying to warn her away from it. The wagon wheels hit a deep rut, sending Luna bouncing so hard her teeth clicked together. She gripped the wooden side with white knuckles as dust clouds swirled around them like tiny tornadoes. Mr. Holloway whistled an old hymn, completely unbothered by the rough ride or the fact that he'd just bought a human being like she was a sack of flour. "How much further?" Luna asked, her voice barely louder than the creaking wheels. "Oh, we're not heading to my show just yet, Missy." Holloway's smile made her stomach twist. "Gotta make a stop in Millbrook first. Need to pick up some supplies." The sun beat down without mercy. Luna's pale skin already felt like it was cooking, even under her wide hat. Every bump in the trail sent sharp pains through her back where she'd been sitting on the hard wagon bed for hours. Her water bottle was nearly empty, but Holloway hadn't offered to refill it at the creek they'd passed an hour ago. She closed her pink eyes and tried to imagine herself somewhere else. Maybe back in the little garden behind their sod house, where she'd grown the best tomatoes in 3 counties. Or sitting by the fire on winter nights, reading her father's old books while the wind howled outside. Anywhere but here, trapped with a man who saw her as nothing more than a way to make money. "You ever been in a real city before?" Holloway asked suddenly. "No, Sia." "Well, you're in for quite a treat. Millbrook's got over 2,000 people. Streets made of actual wood planks. Even got themselves a hotel with glass windows on every floor." Luna had never seen a building taller than 2 stories. The idea of all those people in one place made her chest feel tight. What would they think when they saw her? Would they stare and point like the children at the trading post always did? The wagon crested a small hill, and Luna gasped. Spread out below them was the biggest collection of buildings she'd ever imagined. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys. She could see wagons and people moving like ants along the main street. Her heart started beating so fast she thought it might jump right out of her chest. "Impressive, ain't it?" Holloway said. "Just wait until you see Chicago. Makes this place look like a barn." They rolled down the hill and into the chaos of Millbrook's main street. The noise hit Luna like a physical thing. Horses neighing, people shouting, wagon wheels grinding over wooden planks, dogs barking, chickens squawking. The smells were even worse. Horse manure mixed with cooking food, unwashed bodies, and something sour she couldn't identify. People stopped to stare as they passed. Luna pulled her hat lower, but it was no use. A group of children ran alongside their wagon, pointing and laughing. One threw a small stone that bounced off the wagon side. "Don't mind them," Holloway said, but he was grinning like he enjoyed the attention. They're just curious about something they've never seen before. Luna felt sick. This was her future, being stared at, laughed at, treated like some kind of strange animal wherever they went. She thought about jumping from the wagon and running, but where could she go? She had no money, no friends, no place to hide in this enormous place. Holloway pulled the wagon up in front of a large building with a sign that read, "Murphy's General Store." The wooden sidewalk was crowded with people going in and out, carrying packages and chatting with neighbors. Luna had never seen so many folks in one place at the same time. "Wait here," Holloway ordered, climbing down from the driver's seat. "Don't even think about wandering off. I've got business inside, then we'll get some food before we head out." Luna watched him disappear into the store. The crowd on the sidewalk had noticed her now, and she could hear them whispering. A well-dressed woman in a blue bonnet pointed her out to her friend. Two men in work clothes stopped their conversation to stare. A little girl tugged on her mother's skirt and asked something that made the woman gasp and hurry away. The sun was getting lower in the sky, painting everything orange and gold. Luna's water was completely gone now, and her throat felt like sandpaper. Her skin burned despite the hat, and she could feel sweat running down her back. She'd never been this uncomfortable in her whole life. That's when she saw him. A man on horseback had stopped across the street, and he was staring directly at her. Not the cruel, curious staring she was used to, but something different. Something that made her stomach flutter in a way she didn't understand. He was tall in the saddle, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothes were dusty from travel, but well made. He looked like someone who belonged on the frontier, not stuck in a crowded town. Their eyes met across the busy street, and Luna felt something she'd never experienced before. It was like being seen, really seen, for the first time in her life. Not as a curiosity or a burden or something to be ashamed of, but as a person worth noticing. The stranger guided his paint horse through the crowd, moving with easy confidence. People stepped aside for him without being asked, and Luna could tell he was someone important around here. Her heart hammered as he drew closer. "Afternoon, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and steady, without any of the fake sweetness Holloway used. "Hot day to be sitting in the sun." Luna tried to speak, but only managed a small nod. What did you say to a man like this? She'd barely talked to anyone outside her family in years. "You traveling through with Holloway?" he asked. And something in his tone told her he knew exactly who Holloway was, and didn't much like him. "Yes, sir," Luna whispered. The stranger's jaw tightened slightly. He looked toward the store, then back at her. "That man's got quite a reputation in these parts." Before Luna could ask what he meant, Holloway emerged from the store carrying a small package. His cheerful expression disappeared the moment he saw the stranger. "Well, well, William Carpenter." Holloway's voice had lost all its fake friendliness. "What brings you to town?" "Just passing through," Carpenter replied calmly. "Couldn't help but notice your traveling companion." The two men stared at each other, and Luna felt tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Something was about to happen, something that might change everything. "She's coming with me, fair and legal," Holloway said quickly, climbing back onto the wagon. "Paid good money for her services." William Carpenter's gray eyes went cold as winter ice. "Services?" Luna watched the stranger's hands, noticed how one moved slightly closer to his belt. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She'd never seen two men face off like this before, but even she could tell this was dangerous. "Now don't go getting any wrong ideas, Carpenter," Holloway said with a nervous laugh. "The girl's going to be in my traveling show. Educational purposes, you understand. People pay to learn about the wonders of nature." "Is that what you call it?" Carpenter's voice was quiet, but it carried across the busy street like thunder. Several people had stopped to watch, sensing trouble brewing. Luna felt trapped between these two men, like a rabbit caught between a fox and a wolf. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel the hatred flowing between them. Whatever history they had, it ran deep as a prairie well. The girl's mother signed papers, Holloway continued, patting his coat pocket. All legal and proper. She's my responsibility now. Carpenter looked at Luna then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It wasn't pity or curiosity or disgust. It was anger, but not at her. He was angry for her. Miss, he said gently, is this what you want? The simple question hit Luna like a lightning bolt. In her 17 years, no one had ever asked her what she wanted. Decisions had always been made for her, about her, without anyone caring about her thoughts or feelings. She started, then stopped. What could she say? That she wanted to go home to a mother who'd sold her? That she was terrified of being paraded around like a circus animal? That sometimes late at night, she dreamed of just disappearing into the prairie where no one would ever stare at her again. She doesn't need to want anything, Holloway snapped. She's got a contract to fulfill. Contracts can be broken, Carpenter said. He dismounted from his horse with fluid grace, his boots hitting the wooden planks with authority, especially when they involve selling people. Now you listen here, Carpenter. No, you listen. The stranger stepped closer, and Holloway actually backed up a step. I know exactly what kind of show you run. I know what happened to that Cherokee boy you bought in Kansas Territory 2 years ago. Luna saw Holloway's face go pale. Whatever had happened to that boy, it wasn't good. That was different, Holloway stammered. The boy got sick, caught fever. Wasn't my fault. Worked him to death, you mean? Kept him in a cage, barely fed him, made him perform like a dancing bear until his body gave out. The crowd around them was growing larger. Luna heard someone whisper, "What's he talking about?" And another voice answer, "Holloway killed that Indian boy, but the sheriff couldn't prove it." Luna's hands started shaking. This was her future, being worked to death for other people's entertainment. She thought about her mother's words that morning. It's for the best, Luna. You'll see. How could her own mother not have known what kind of man Holloway was? I'd like to make you an offer, Carpenter said, his voice carrying clearly over the street noise. She's not for sale to you, Holloway replied quickly. Everything's for sale to the right buyer. Carpenter reached into his vest and pulled out a small leather pouch. $50. Cash. Luna gasped. $50 was more money than her family saw in 2 years of farming and trading. It was enough to buy a decent horse, or supplies for an entire winter, or her freedom. Holloway's eyes went wide. She could practically see him calculating the profit. He'd paid $30 for her, and now he could make $20 without having to feed her or transport her, or deal with any of the problems that came with keeping a person in a traveling show. $60, Holloway said greedily. Done. Carpenter didn't even hesitate. He counted out the money right there on the street, in front of everyone. But I want those papers you mentioned, the ones her mother signed. Holloway handed over both the money and the papers so fast, Luna wondered if he'd been looking for an excuse to get rid of her all along. Maybe she was more trouble than she was worth. Maybe he'd realized that people might ask uncomfortable questions about keeping a young woman in his show. Pleasure doing business with you, Holloway said, already climbing back onto his wagon. She's all yours now. And just like that, Luna found herself standing on a wooden sidewalk in Millbrook, Nebraska, belonging to a complete stranger. She watched Holloway drive away without looking back, taking with him the last connection to her old life. The crowd began to break up, disappointed that the confrontation hadn't turned into a real fight. Soon it was just Luna and William Carpenter, standing in the orange light of the setting sun. Well, he said quietly, I suppose we should talk. Luna nodded, not trusting her voice. Her whole world had just changed in the space of 10 minutes, and she had no idea what came next. There's a boarding house just down the street, Carpenter continued. Clean rooms, decent food. You can stay there tonight while we figure things out. Figure what out? Luna asked. Carpenter looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. What you want to do next? Where you want to go? Who you want to be? The questions were so overwhelming that Luna felt dizzy. She'd spent her whole life being told what to do, where to go, who to be. The idea that she might actually have choices was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. I don't have any money, she whispered. That's not your concern right now. Carpenter gathered his horse's reins. Come on, let's get you fed and rested. Tomorrow we can talk about the future. As they walked down the busy street together, Luna caught her reflection in a store window. For the first time in her life, she didn't immediately look away from her pale skin and pink eyes. Instead, She saw something different. A young woman walking beside a man who had just spent $60 to buy her freedom. She still didn't know what came next. But for the first time in 17 years, she was excited to find out. A gunshot cracked across the morning air like thunder, sending the chickens into a frenzy of squawking and feathers. Luna dropped the bucket of feed she'd been carrying, her heart hammering against her ribs as she spun toward the sound. 3 riders sat on the ridge overlooking William's ranch, their dark shapes cutting sharp lines against the pale sky. "Get inside." William's voice came from behind her, steady but tight with warning. He'd appeared from the barn with his rifle already in hand, his gray eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk watching for prey. But Luna couldn't move. She knew that middle rider, even from this distance. The way he sat his horse, straight-backed and proud, like he owned everything his eyes could see. Holloway had returned, and he hadn't come alone. The riders picked their way down the slope, their horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust with each step. As they drew closer, Luna could make out the 2 men flanking Holloway, rough-looking fellows, with the kind of faces that had seen too many barroom fights, and lost most of them. Their hands rested easy on their gun belts, and their eyes never stopped moving, taking in every door, every window, every place where trouble might be hiding. "William Carpenter," Holloway called out when they were still 50 yards away. His voice carried the false cheer of a snake oil salesman. "Beautiful morning, isn't it? Perfect for conducting business." William didn't lower his rifle. "State your business and be on your way, Holloway. You're not welcome here." Holloway's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Now, that's not very neighborly, especially when I've brought the girl's dear mother along for this little reunion." Luna's breath caught in her throat. From behind the 3 men, a 4th rider appeared, a woman on an old mare, her shoulders bent with exhaustion and something that looked like shame. Even at this distance, Luna would know that tired posture anywhere. "Mama?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. Margaret Ashford raised her head, and across the dusty yard, mother and daughter looked at each other for the first time since that awful day 3 months ago. Margaret's face was thinner now, carved hollow by worry and regret. Her dress, once the best she owned, was faded and patched. But her eyes held something Luna had never seen there before. Sorrow, yes, but also a desperate kind of love that made Luna's chest ache. "Luna, child." Margaret's voice cracked like old leather. "I've come to take you home. Please. The ranch is failing without your help with the books. The neighbors won't trade with us anymore. Not after what I did. We need each other." Holloway's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "How touching. But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. You see, Mr. Carpenter, the girl belongs to me. I paid good money for her, $30 in silver coin. That's a legal contract, witnessed by Mrs. Ashford herself. No contract gives you the right to own another person," William said, his voice deadly quiet. "Luna stays here because she chooses to." "Choice?" One of Holloway's men, a scarred fellow with tobacco stains on his beard, spat into the dirt. "What choice does a freak have? She's lucky anyone wants her at all." The word hit Luna like a slap. Freak. It was a word she'd heard whispered behind hands her whole life, a word that followed her like a shadow. But hearing it spoken out loud, in front of William, made her face burn with shame. William's knuckles went white on his rifle stock. "I suggest you choose your next words very carefully, friend." "Or what?" The scarred man's hand drifted toward his gun. "You'll shoot us over some albino girl? She ain't worth the powder it'd take to blow her up." "That's enough." The 3rd rider, a young man not much older than Luna herself, spoke for the first time. His voice shook slightly, as if he wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. "We came here to get the girl, not start a war." Holloway shot him a sharp look. "Jimmy's right. No need for unpleasantness. Mrs. Ashford, why don't you talk sense into your daughter? Explain to her where her duty lies." Margaret climbed down from her horse with the careful movements of someone much older than her years. She walked toward Luna slowly, her hands held out like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any moment. "Luna," she said, stopping just a few feet away. "Look at me, child. Really look." Luna forced herself to meet her mother's eyes, expecting to see the familiar mixture of resignation and disappointment that had colored every interaction of her childhood. Instead, she found something that made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. Love, raw, desperate, imperfect love that had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of fear and exhaustion, and the crushing weight of trying to survive in a world that showed no mercy to the different or the weak. "I was wrong," Margaret whispered, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "God help me. I was so wrong. When your daddy died, I thought I had to be strong for both of us. I thought strength meant making the hard choices, even if they broke my heart. But selling you, giving you away like you were nothing more than livestock, that wasn't strength. That was cowardice." Luna felt her own eyes filling with tears. "Mama, I don't expect you to forgive me," Margaret continued. "I don't deserve forgiveness. But come home with me, child. Let me try to make things right. Let me show you that you matter, that you've always mattered, more than breath in my body." For a moment, Luna wavered. The child in her, the lonely, frightened child, who had spent 17 years believing she was unwanted, reached toward the promise of acceptance, of finally being enough for the woman who had brought her into the world. But then she felt William's presence beside her, steady and sure as mountain stone. She remembered the way he looked at her, not with pity or fascination, but with respect. She thought of the morning he'd asked her opinion about which pasture to use for the new calves, and how his face had lit up when she'd suggested rotating them to prevent overgrazing. She remembered the evening he'd found her reading by candlelight and had sat down to listen, genuinely interested in her thoughts about the book. "I can't," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Mama, I love you. I always have. But I can't come home and pretend that what happened didn't happen. I can't go back to being the shameful secret you hide in the back room." Margaret's face crumpled. "It won't be like that. I swear to you, it won't." "It will," Luna said gently. "Because you still see me as something that needs to be fixed or hidden or explained away. You love me, I know that now. But you don't see me as I really am." Holloway had heard enough. He swung down from his horse with practiced ease, his hand resting on his gun butt. "This is all very moving, but I have a business to run. The girl comes with me, one way or another." "Like hell she does." William stepped forward, placing himself between Holloway and Luna. The morning sun caught the barrel of his rifle, sending bright sparks of light across the dusty ground. Now, Holloway said, his voice taking on the oily smoothness of a professional persuader. "Let's be reasonable men about this. I understand your attachment to the girl. She's certainly unique. But think practically. What kind of life can you offer her? Marriage? Children? A place in decent society?" He laughed, the sound like gravel in a tin bucket. "No respectable woman will associate with her. No church will welcome her. Her children, if she's even capable of having them, will be cursed with the same affliction. Is that kindness, Mr. Carpenter? Or is that the cruelest prison of all?" Each word was chosen like a blade, designed to cut deep into the fears Luna tried to keep buried. She saw William's jaw tighten, saw doubt flicker across his features like shadows from passing clouds. "With me," Holloway continued, "she has purpose. People will pay to see her, yes, but they'll also be amazed by her. She'll travel, see the world, meet important people. She'll be famous, in her way. What more could someone like her hope for?" The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Luna could hear her own heartbeat, could smell the dust and sweat and gunpowder tension that hung in the air like smoke. She waited for William to speak, to deny Holloway's poisonous words, to declare that love was stronger than fear. But William said nothing. And in that silence, Luna heard the confirmation of every cruel thing she'd ever believed about herself. Thunder rolled across the prairie, like God's own war drums, though not a cloud marred the blue dome of sky stretching endlessly overhead. Luna's head snapped up from where she knelt in her garden, her hands still dirty from pulling weeds among the tomato plants. "Fire!" William breathed, appearing beside her so quickly she gasped. His face had gone pale beneath his tan, his gray eyes reflecting a terror she'd never seen there before. "Prairie fire, moving fast." On the eastern horizon, a thin black line had appeared like someone had drawn it with charcoal across a child's slate. Even as Luna watched, it seemed to grow thicker, darker, more menacing. Above it, smoke billowed up in great rolling clouds that turned the afternoon sun the color of old blood. "How far?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer from the tight set of William's shoulders. 5 miles, maybe 6. With this wind. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Prairie fires could move faster than a galloping horse when the wind was right, consuming everything in their path with the hunger of something alive and angry. Holloway and his men had heard the thunder, too. The scarred man who'd introduced himself as Polk was already scanning the horizon with the nervous energy of someone who'd seen fire before and lived to regret it. "We need to get out of here," he said, his earlier swagger replaced by genuine fear. "Now." "The horses won't outrun it," William said flatly. "Not carrying double. Not in this wind." Luna's mind raced, cataloging everything she knew about the ranch, about the land William had shown her during their rides together. The creek bed was too shallow to provide real protection. The barn was all wood and hay. It would go up like a torch. The house might survive if the wind shifted, but might wasn't good enough when lives hung in the balance. Then she remembered something, a detail so small she almost hadn't paid attention when William mentioned it weeks ago. The previous owner of the ranch, old Jakob Mueller, had been a cautious man. Cautious enough to dig more than just a well when he'd first settled the land. "The root cellar," she said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her, William with surprise, Holloway with impatience, her mother with something that might have been hope. Behind the house, built into the hillside. Jakob Mueller dug it deep, remember? Deep enough to store vegetables through the winter, with thick stone walls and a heavy wooden door. William's eyes lit up with understanding. "It might work. It's our best chance anyway." "Best chance at what?" Holloway demanded. "Getting buried alive when the fire passes over? I'd rather take my luck on horseback." "Then take it," William said curtly. "But Luna and her mother are going into the cellar." "I'm not leaving my daughter," Margaret said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken since Luna's refusal to come home, and her voice carried a new quality, a determination that reminded Luna of iron wrapped in silk. Polk was already moving toward his horse. "Boss, we need to ride. Now." But Jimmy, the youngest of Holloway's men, was staring at the approaching fire with wide eyes. "Look at it," he whispered. "It's moving so fast." He was right. What had been a thin line minutes before now loomed like a wall of orange and red and black, stretching from north to south as far as the eye could see. The wind carried the sound of its approach, a roar like a waterfall made of flame, punctuated by the sharp cracks of burning wood and the terrified calls of fleeing animals. "The cellar," Luna said again, her voice cutting through the growing panic. "It's our only chance." She was already running, her skirts hiked up to keep from tripping, her pale hair streaming behind her like a banner of surrender. Behind her, she could hear footsteps, William's boots, her mother's lighter step, even the reluctant sounds of Holloway's men following. The cellar door was almost hidden behind a tangle of wild roses that Jakob Mueller's wife had planted before the fever took her. Luna tore at the thorns with her bare hands, ignoring the scratches that beaded blood on her pale skin. The wooden door was heavy, swollen with decades of prairie moisture. But William's strong hands joined hers, and together they hauled it open. The space below was smaller than Luna remembered, maybe 10 feet square, carved directly into the hillside and lined with fieldstone. Shelves that had once held preserved vegetables now stood empty, draped in cobwebs that caught the fading daylight like silver lace. "Get in," William commanded, and for once no one argued. They tumbled into the musty darkness one by one, Luna first, then her mother, then Holloway cursing under his breath, then his 2 men looking like they'd rather face a dozen armed sheriffs than huddle in an underground tomb. William came last, pulling the door shut above them with a thud that seemed to echo in Luna's bones. The darkness was complete, thick as velvet and twice as suffocating. Someone struck a match, Jimmy, she thought, and the small flame revealed 7 faces painted with fear and hope in equal measure. "How long?" Margaret whispered. "However long it takes," William replied, but Luna could hear the uncertainty in his voice. None of them had ever hidden from a prairie fire before. None of them knew if the cellar would protect them or simply provide a more comfortable place to die. Above their heads, the roar grew louder. Through the thick wooden door and stone walls, they could feel the vibration of the fire's approach, a trembling in the earth itself that spoke of forces beyond human control. The temperature in the small space began to rise, and Luna found herself pressed against William's side, drawing comfort from his steady breathing. "Tell me about the stars," she whispered to him, remembering the night he'd taught her the constellations from the porch of his cabin. "Tell me about the Big Dipper." His voice was steady in the darkness, painting pictures of distant suns while hell raged overhead. Margaret took her daughter's other hand, her fingers rough from years of hard work but gentle, in a way Luna had almost forgotten. Even Holloway had stopped his cursing, perhaps recognizing that in the face of nature's fury, all human conflict seemed suddenly small and petty. The roar reached its peak, a sound like the world ending, and then something changed. The temperature, which had been rising steadily, began to level off. The vibration in the earth grew fainter. The smell of smoke, which had been seeping through the cracks around the door, began to lessen. "Is it?" Jimmy's voice cracked on the words, "moving past." William finished. "The wind's carrying it west, toward the Johansson place." They waited another hour before William deemed it safe to open the door. When he did, daylight flooded down into their shelter, not the warm golden light of afternoon, but the strange red-orange glow of a world transformed by fire. Luna climbed out first, blinking in the eerie light. The landscape that greeted her was like something from a fever dream. Where green prairie grass had waved in the morning breeze, now black stubble stretched to the horizon. The air was thick with ash and the smell of burning, but the cabin still stood, its walls scorched but intact. The barn was gone, reduced to a pile of smoking timbers, but the well survived, and the chicken coop, and even some of the fence posts William had worked so hard to set straight. "We're alive," Margaret breathed, and Luna heard wonder in her mother's voice, as if she hadn't quite believed it would be possible. "Thanks to Luna," William said quietly. "She remembered the cellar when the rest of us were too frightened to think clearly." Holloway emerged from the cellar last, his fine black coat now gray with dust and cobwebs. He looked around at the burned landscape with the expression of a man calculating losses. His show, Luna realized, depended on traveling from town to town, and half the towns in their path now lay in the fire's wake. "Well," he said finally, brushing ash from his sleeves, "this changes things considerably." But Luna wasn't listening to Holloway anymore. She was watching her mother, seeing the way Margaret looked at her daughter not with shame or resignation, but with something that might have been pride. And she was feeling the solid warmth of William's hand on her shoulder, steady and sure and completely without judgment. For the first time in her life, Luna Ashford felt like exactly what she was, not a burden to be endured or a curiosity to be displayed, but a person whose quick thinking and courage had just saved 7 lives. The prairie fire had taken much, but it had also revealed something precious. Her own worth had never depended on the color of her skin or the opinions of strangers. It had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to shine through the smoke and ash of other people's fears. The ground still smoked when they crawled out of the cellar, and Luna's heart nearly stopped when she saw what the fire had left behind. Black earth stretched as far as her eyes could see, with twisted metal fence posts sticking up like broken bones. The barn was gone completely, and half of William's cattle lay dead in the pasture. "My God," Margaret whispered, covering her mouth with her dirty hands. Holloway kicked at a burned piece of wood and swore under his breath. "Waste of a perfectly good trip," he muttered to his men. "Come on, nothing here worth our time now." But Luna wasn't looking at the destruction anymore. She was watching William walk slowly through what used to be his life's work, his shoulders straight even though everything he owned had turned to ash. When he knelt down and picked up a piece of charred fence post, she saw his hands shake just once before he made them steady again. "William," she called softly, walking toward him across the blackened ground. He looked up at her, and for a moment she saw something raw and broken in his face. "Took me 5 years to build this place," he said quietly. 5 years of working from sunrise to sunset, saving every penny, planning every fence post. Luna knelt beside him in the ash, not caring that it stained her dress. "It can be built again. With what money? With what cattle?" His voice cracked slightly. "I had enough saved to last through winter. Now I have nothing except debts I can't pay." Behind them, Margaret Ashford watched her daughter comfort this man who had lost everything trying to protect her. Something twisted in her chest, not jealousy, but a deep sadness for all the years she had pushed Luna away instead of pulling her close. Holloway appeared at William's shoulder like a vulture. "Carpenter, I'll make you a deal. Give me the girl, and I'll pay you $50 instead of the $30 I gave her mother. You need the money now more than you need her problems." William stood up so fast that ash swirled around his boots. "Get off my land." "What land?" Holloway laughed harshly. "You've got nothing but burned dirt and dead dreams. At least I'm offering you something real." "I said get off my land." William's hand moved toward his gun. Luna stepped between them, her heart hammering against her ribs. All her life, people had fought over her like she was a thing to be owned. Her mother had sold her. Holloway wanted to buy her. Even William, kind as he was, had paid money for her freedom. "Stop," she said, her voice carrying across the ruined ranch. "All of you, just stop." Everyone turned to look at her, and Luna felt the weight of their stares. But this time, instead of making her want to hide, it made her feel strong. "Mr. Holloway," she said, walking toward the man who had tried to buy her twice. "I am not for sale. I never was for sale. I am a person, not a cow at market." Holloway's face darkened. "Your mother had legal right to—" "My mother was desperate and scared," Luna interrupted, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But that doesn't make what she did right, and it doesn't make me your property." She turned to face her mother, who stood frozen near the cellar door. "Mama, I know you thought you were helping. I know you were afraid we would both starve. But I am not a burden you need to sell to survive." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Luna, And William," Luna continued, turning to face the man she had grown to love, "I know you paid Holloway to get me away from him. I know you thought you were saving me, but I don't want to be saved like a stray kitten. I want to be chosen because you think I'm worth choosing." William stared at her, ash smudged on his face, his gray eyes wide with surprise. "So I'm choosing myself," Luna declared, her voice ringing across the burned prairie. "I choose to stay here and help rebuild this ranch, not because anyone owns me or bought me, but because this is where I want to be. And if you want me to stay, William Carpenter, then ask me properly." The silence stretched like a held breath. Then William smiled, really smiled, for the first time since they had crawled out of the cellar. "Luna Ashford," he said, walking toward her through the ash and ruin, "would you stay here and be my partner? Not my rescued stray, not my bought property, but my equal partner in rebuilding something better than what burned down?" Luna's heart soared like a bird released from a cage. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, I will." Margaret stepped forward then, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. "Luna, can you ever forgive a foolish old woman who was too scared to see how strong her daughter really was?" Luna looked at her mother, really looked at her, and saw not the person who had tried to sell her, but the frightened widow who had made terrible choices out of love and desperation. "I forgive you, Mama," she said softly, "but I won't come home with you. This is my home now." Margaret nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "Then let me help you build it." Holloway spat in the dirt one final time. "Bunch of fools," he growled, stalking toward his wagon with his men trailing behind him. "You'll all starve before winter." As his wagon disappeared over the hill, Luna felt a hand slip into hers. William's fingers were warm and steady, and when she looked up at him, she saw her future reflected in his storm-gray eyes. "So," he said with a grin that made her stomach flutter, "ready to learn how to rebuild a ranch from nothing?" Luna squeezed his hand and looked out over the blackened land that would soon bloom green again. "I've been ready my whole life." 3 years later, on a morning when the Nebraska sky stretched blue and endless above the rebuilt Carpenter Ranch, Luna stood in her kitchen making breakfast for her family. The bacon sizzled in the pan while she stirred eggs that came from her own chickens, and through the window she could see William leading their horses out to pasture. "Mama! Mama!" 2-year-old James toddled into the kitchen on unsteady legs, his hair catching the sunlight like spun gold mixed with silver. His eyes were his father's gray, but when the light hit them just right, they showed tiny flecks of pink that made Luna's heart sing with joy. "What is it, little man?" she asked, scooping him up with one arm while she flipped bacon with the other. "Papa says come see." James pointed excitedly toward the window. "Big surprise." Luna wiped her hands on her apron and carried James outside, where she found William standing beside a brand-new wagon painted bright red with yellow trim. In the back sat Margaret Ashford, grinning like a child on Christmas morning. "Surprise!" her mother called out, climbing down from the wagon with packages in her arms. "I brought presents for my grandson's birthday." Luna shook her head in amazement. Ever since that terrible day 3 years ago, her mother had visited every few months, slowly building a relationship with the daughter she had almost lost forever. Margaret had never remarried, choosing instead to live simply and send what money she could to help rebuild the ranch. "Mama, you didn't have to—" "Nonsense," Margaret interrupted, unwrapping a wooden toy horse that made James squeal with delight. "A grandmother has certain duties." William appeared at Luna's side, slipping his arm around her waist. "There's more," he said quietly in her ear. "Look in the wagon." Luna peered into the wagon bed and gasped. Nestled in blankets was a tiny baby, perhaps 6 months old, with the palest skin she had ever seen, and eyes the color of spring sky. "This is little Mary," Margaret explained gently. "Her parents died of fever last month. The church was going to send her to an orphanage in Omaha, but I thought—" She paused, looking uncertain for the first time. "I thought maybe she might be happier here." Luna's breath caught in her throat. The baby was like looking at herself as an infant, so pale she was almost transparent, with that otherworldly beauty that made some people whisper and others stare. "They said no family would want her because of how she looks," Margaret continued softly. "But I remembered what it was like when you were born. How I was too scared to see past your differences to the wonderful person you were becoming." William squeezed Luna's hand. "It's up to you," he murmured. "But our house has plenty of room for love." Luna reached into the wagon and gently lifted the baby, who opened her pale blue eyes and looked up at her with complete trust. In that moment, Luna saw her own childhood reflected back at her, but this time, it would be different. This child would grow up knowing she was wanted, valued, and loved exactly as she was. "Hello, Mary," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Welcome to your new home." James tugged at her skirt, jealous of the attention the baby was getting. "My baby?" he asked hopefully. "Your sister," Luna corrected, kneeling down so he could see Mary properly. "Your very special little sister. Pretty baby," James declared solemnly, then toddled off to play with his new wooden horse. That evening, as the sun painted the Nebraska sky in shades of gold and rose, the Carpenter family sat on their front porch, watching their cattle graze in pastures that had grown back greener and stronger than before. Margaret had stayed for supper and was now rocking baby Mary to sleep, while humming an old lullaby. "Do you ever regret it?" William asked quietly, settling beside Luna on the porch swing he had built for their first anniversary. "Staying here instead of seeing the world?" Luna looked out over the land they had built together, the sturdy house, the full barn, the healthy cattle, the garden that provided more vegetables than they could eat. Then she looked at her son playing in the dirt with his wooden horse, at the baby sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, at the man beside her who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. "The world is right here," she said softly, taking his hand. "Everything I ever wanted to see, everything I ever wanted to be, everything I ever wanted to become, it's all right here." A shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, and James pointed up at it with wonder. "Look, Mama, star falling." "Make a wish, sweetheart," Luna called to him. But as she sat there surrounded by the family she had chosen and who had chosen her, Luna realized she didn't need to wish for anything. She had already found everything she had ever dreamed of: acceptance, love, purpose, and the knowledge that her worth had never been determined by the color of her skin or the pink of her eyes. She was Luna Carpenter, wife and mother, rancher and bookkeeper, survivor and thriver. She was exactly who she was meant to be, and that was more than enough.